Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Carl Jung's words strike like a tuning fork, resonating with the truth we may not always want to hear. That the very things that annoy us about the people around us aren't just about them. They're also windows into us. Think about it. What if those knee-jerk reactions, those judgments, those little flares of irritation, were clues to parts of ourselves we've locked away? Today, we're stepping into the brilliant, sometimes mystical world of Carl Jung, a pioneer whose work continues to shape how we understand not only psychology, but relationships, motivation, and the soul of being human. In a culture obsessed with appearances and social masks, Jung dares us to dig deeper. He hands us a mirror, not just to see others more clearly, but to finally meet ourselves face to face. Jung wasn't your average psychologist. A former protege of Freud, he broke away to explore the mind in ways that still feel revolutionary. While Freud focused heavily on repressed desires, Jung widened the lens. He introduced us to the idea of the collective unconscious, a kind of psychic inheritance we all share. He gave us archetypes, those universal patterns of behavior and symbolism that show up in myths, dreams, films, and everyday life. And through the process of individuation, he offered a roadmap to becoming whole. At the heart of Jung's approach is a deep respect for the complexity of people. We're not logical robots or easily classified personality types. We are layered, mysterious, and often out of touch with our true motivations. Jung's genius was in helping us navigate those layers to bridge the gap between who we think we are and who we really are. Let's start with how Jung viewed the mind. Most people assume they are entirely in control of their thoughts and decisions. But Jung would say, not so fast. What you're consciously aware of is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath your awareness lies the personal unconscious, a storehouse of forgotten memories, unresolved emotions, and parts of yourself you've rejected. These aren't just sitting there quietly, they're actively influencing how you behave, how you feel, and how you relate to others. And then there's the collective unconscious, which is even deeper. It's a kind of psychic bedrock, filled with symbols and instincts shared by all human beings. This is where we find archetypes like the hero, the mother, the trickster, recurring figures that shape how we dream, love, fight, and grow. But perhaps the most accessible way to start reading people and ourselves is by understanding two core Jungian ideas: the persona and the shadow. The persona is the mask you wear. It's how you present yourself to the world. It's polished, edited, and crafted to meet social expectations. Think of how you act during a job interview or what you post on social media. That's your persona doing its job, creating a socially acceptable version of you. It's not necessarily dishonest, but it is selective. Then there's the shadow. The shadow is everything you've repressed, denied, or never fully faced. It includes the traits you find unacceptable, like anger, envy, or selfishness, but also the parts of you that might actually be wonderful, yet feel threatening. Your confidence, your sexuality, your ambition. These get pushed down because somewhere along the way, you learn they weren't okay. But here's the kicker. Just because they're hidden doesn't mean they disappear. The shadow continues to operate behind the scenes, shaping your behavior in ways you don't realize. And when you're around someone who embodies a part of your shadow, that's when irritation, jealousy, or judgment flares up. Not because they're wrong, but because they're holding up a mirror to something you've disowned. Jung called this projection. It's when we unconsciously attribute our own shadow traits to others. Ever find yourself harshly judging someone for being arrogant, lazy, or manipulative, only to later realize, deep down, you've struggled with those same tendencies? That's projection. It's sneaky, it's powerful, and it's happening all the time. Imagine this scenario. A woman criticizes a colleague for being too ambitious and always needing the spotlight. On the surface, it sounds like a simple personality clash. But Jung would ask, what if she's suppressing her own drive? What if she learned somewhere in life that ambition makes you unlikable, so she buried it, only to see it reflected loudly in someone else? The more emotionally charged your reaction, the more likely projection is at play. And the more often you encounter the same frustrating trait in different people, the more urgent the message from your unconscious becomes. This is about you too. Let's take it a step further. Jung believed that the shadow isn't just made up of bad traits, it also contains gold. Hidden in the shadow are strengths and passions you were too scared or ashamed to claim. Maybe you were a loud, expressive child who was told to be quiet, or a creative spirit raised in a family that valued practicality over imagination. You learn to tuck those qualities away to be accepted, but they don't die. They wait. And here's the real danger. When shadow material isn't integrated, it takes the wheel without you knowing. That's when your behavior starts to contradict your values. You sabotage yourself. You lash out. You say, I don't know why I acted that way. Jung would say, your shadow acted for you. This is where things get personal. Ever notice someone who's always involved in drama? Always dating the same toxic partner or getting into the same kinds of fights? Those aren't just unfortunate patterns, they're expressions of unresolved shadow dynamics. Until we make the unconscious conscious, Jung said, it will rule our lives, and we will call it fate. But this isn't all doom and gloom. Quite the opposite. Recognizing these patterns is the first step toward freedom. When you realize that your irritation with someone else might be a projection of your own insecurity, you gain a chance to grow. You can ask, what am I not seeing in myself? What part of me have I disowned that's trying to get my attention? The beautiful irony of Jung's work is this. The more you understand your own depths, the more clearly you see others. Not through the fog of projection, but with real empathy. You start to see that everyone is struggling with their own shadows. Everyone is wearing a persona. Everyone is navigating contradictions they don't fully understand. Jung didn't stop with individual psychology either. His theory of archetypes, those timeless characters like the hero, the sage, the lover, the trickster, helps us decode the universal stories people live out, often unconsciously. These archetypes aren't just in myths, they show up in boardrooms, families, friendships. Understanding which archetype someone is embodying can help you spot their unconscious motives and your own. For example, someone stuck in the hero archetype might constantly seek challenges, push themselves to the limit, and feel lost without a quest. Someone caught in the trickster archetype might stir chaos without realizing why, using charm or deception to mask vulnerability. Recognizing these patterns doesn't just make you wiser, it makes you more compassionate. So, the next time someone gets under your skin, pause. Don't immediately judge. Instead, get curious. Ask yourself, what part of me is reacting here? What might this person be mirroring back to me? That irritation? It could be an invitation, a message from your unconscious, asking to be heard. Jung's work isn't just about psychology, it's a philosophy for life. A way of seeing people not as puzzles to solve or threats to avoid, but as mirrors, guides, and fellow travelers in the messy, magical process of becoming whole. And that is the real power of his insights. They teach us to stop reacting blindly and start responding with awareness. They help us turn irritation into understanding, conflict into connection, and projection into profound self-discovery. If this resonated with you, maybe it's time to explore your own shadow, not to fix yourself, but to know yourself more deeply. Because the more you face within, the more clearly you'll see the world outside. And that, perhaps, is the most liberating truth of all. When certain archetypes are triggered within us, they don't just whisper, they can roar, override, and even hijack our conscious intentions. Carl Jung called this state archetypal possession, a phenomenon where a person becomes more of a role than a whole. Their choices become less about free will and more about embodying an ancient psychic script, one written long before they were born. Imagine someone gripped by the hero archetype. On the surface, they may genuinely say they seek peace, harmony, and stability. Yet time and again, their actions seem to stir conflict, to generate drama, to manufacture metaphorical dragons that need slaying. Subconsciously, they may crave situations where they can rescue, fight, or prove their strength, because without an enemy, they don't know who they are. Similarly, someone under the spell of the trickster archetype may insist they support the rules and structures around them, all while subtly, perhaps even unknowingly, undermining those very systems. They don't set out to be disruptive. In fact, they may see themselves as helpful. But chaos follows them like a shadow. This doesn't mean people are being dishonest. Often, the conscious mind is in full agreement with what's being said. But deeper forces are at work, ones that shape behavior from behind the curtain. Archetypes, like mythic roles embedded in the psyche, influence how we see ourselves and how we interact with others. When these archetypes are active, they shape our stories, filter our perceptions, and direct our actions, even when they contradict what we believe we want. The human psyche is a layered, complex system. We like to think we're driven by intention and clarity, but in truth, much of our behavior arises from beneath the surface. Jung's genius lay in showing us that these deeper layers are not just chaotic impulses, but structured, symbolic systems, like myths encoded in our DNA. And when we are unaware of them, they don't go away. They act out through us. One of the clearest indicators of archetypal possession is when someone becomes emotionally overinvested in a particular identity or role. They may cling to being the caretaker, the rebel, the martyr, the teacher, regardless of the situation. Their self-image becomes so fixed, so tied to that role, that any deviation feels threatening. This rigidity often blinds them to the impact of their own actions. They may claim to want peace while continually generating drama. Or they may preach openness while shutting down others in subtle but consistent ways. There's often a compulsive quality to this behavior, a sense that they have to act this way, even if it causes harm. Recognizing these unconscious patterns in others and ourselves requires more than observation. It takes a symbolic ear, a mythic lens. Jung believed the unconscious speaks in symbols, not just in dreams, but in everyday language, metaphors, and emotional reactions. Unlike signs, which have direct, one-to-one meanings, symbols are rich, ambiguous, and layered. They point beyond themselves. They hint, echo, and resonate. And most importantly, they bridge the gap between the conscious and unconscious realms. Listen closely to how people describe their world. The metaphors they use often reveal more than their stated beliefs. Someone who always describes work as a battlefield or relationships as investments is showing you how they relate to those areas of life, what they expect from them, what dangers they perceive, and what victories they seek. These aren't just colorful phrases. They're windows into the unconscious. The same goes for slips of the tongue, those so-called Freudian slips where someone says one thing but means another. These moments can feel awkward or embarrassing, but they often shine a light on truths the conscious mind would rather hide. Similarly, emotional incongruence, when someone's tone doesn't match their words, can be a clue that unconscious material is bubbling up. A cheerful statement delivered with tension in the jaw, a calm sentence accompanied by clenched fists, these contradictions speak volumes. Even our body language joins the conversation. Micro-expressions, posture shifts, and repetitive gestures can all betray what words try to conceal. People may say they feel confident while unconsciously shrinking into themselves. They may claim affection while subtly withdrawing. The body rarely lies. Our attractions and repulsions also tell stories. What fascinates someone What they obsess over or idealize often reveals parts of themselves they have not fully integrated. Likewise, intense dislike or moral outrage can sometimes be a projection of a disowned trait, the shadow side of the personality showing up in the outer world. Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, disown, or suppress, which then project onto others. And then there are synchronicities, those strange, meaningful coincidences that seem to defy logic. A theme appears in a dream, then in a conversation, then in a book you randomly pick up. When patterns repeat across different domains, they often point to something significant, an unconscious dynamic seeking consciousness. Jung believed these moments were evidence of a deeper, interconnected reality, where the psyche and the world reflect each other in mysterious ways. To make sense of all this, Jung recommended a practice called active imagination, a state of relaxed, inward attention where we allow images, feelings, and associations to emerge without immediately analyzing them. This isn't about solving puzzles, it's about letting meaning unfold on its own terms. When trying to understand someone, this means setting aside the urge to judge or label. Instead, we watch. We listen. We ask, what themes keep showing up in their speech, their choices, their relationships? What roles do they keep playing? What emotional undertones keep resurfacing? But, and this is crucial, we must do all this with humility. Psychological insight is powerful, and with power comes responsibility. Jung warned against using this knowledge as a weapon. The point isn't to dissect people or catch them in hypocrisy. It's to understand them more fully and ultimately to connect more authentically. Everyone, including you, has unconscious motives. Everyone struggles with the tension between their ideals and their instincts. The more compassion we bring to that truth, the more humane and meaningful our relationships become. And that work begins with the self. The better you understand your own archetypes, your own shadow, your own symbolic language, the more clearly you'll see others. Without this inner work, it's all too easy to project, to mistake someone else's pattern for your own, or your pattern for theirs. Jung's famous line reminds us why this matters. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This doesn't just apply to personal growth. It applies to how we read and relate to others. Ultimately, Jung's system isn't about making judgments, it's about expanding awareness. When someone's actions don't match their words, they're not necessarily lying. They may be expressing a deeper truth, one they themselves don't yet see. Archetypes, shadows, and symbols are not flaws to fix, but aspects of the whole self. By seeing these forces at work in others, we open the door to greater understanding, not just of them, but of the human condition itself. When you understand someone's deeper patterns, you don't reduce them to a stereotype. You expand your capacity to love them as they are. You begin to hear what isn't said. You notice what doesn't match. You develop an intuition that goes beyond logic, beyond the surface, and into the heart of what drives people. This awareness doesn't make you cold or calculating. On the contrary, it softens you. It invites empathy. As we peel back the layers of persona, the masks we all wear, we begin to glimpse the soul beneath. And in doing so, we also encounter our own. There is no shortcut to this kind of seeing. It requires attention, patience, and a willingness to question your own assumptions. But the reward is profound. Deeper relationships, clearer perception, and a greater sense of connection to yourself and the world around you. Jung didn't teach us to manipulate others. He taught us to meet them more truthfully. The purpose of understanding archetypes and symbols isn't to decode people like puzzles, but to honor their complexity. To stop reacting and start relating. To move from judgment to curiosity. From defensiveness to openness. Because in the end, every person is a mystery. A walking myth. A unique expression of universal forces trying to become whole. When we meet each other with that level of awareness, the ordinary becomes sacred. Conversation becomes revelation. Relationship becomes transformation. As Jung said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. May your journey through the symbolic and archetypal bring you more of these reactions, moments of depth, insight, and connection that change not only how you see others, but how you see yourself.